Hey everybody, and welcome back to another witness analysis video. So, let me turn this down a little bit so that you don't get too much of that coming over the microphone. So the next thing we're going to look at is the keep area. So last time we looked at the desert. I believe we did redirect the laser. Yeah, okay. So we can pretty much just head straight over to the keep. So I haven't thought too much about what I'm going to talk about with the keep. Um, there's really only like 8 puzzles there. Well, I guess there's 10 puzzles. So it's not the smallest area, which I think is the Zen Temple that we have already covered, although you'll see that it's not solved here, which of course I mentioned. That's just because I haven't been keeping a cumulative save. I need to go back through and redo those areas because I want to have a cumulative save so I can kind of just go through things. Anyway, so yeah. Of course, the keep itself is quite prominent, I think. You're heading through here, you've got this rather large yard here in front of it. Yeah, I'm not sure quite what to make a comment about other than, I guess as you head in, you're likely to see the tower here as a bit of a focal point. Standing around here, there's kind of a lot of things to see. Let's kind of think about how, I guess, this directs your attention. Yeah. I think some players are going to double back and see all this stuff here, and some players may continue on to the back. You could really go either way, right? When I first played this, I did the front yard first and did the back much later. So I think we want to kind of go with that approach because it feels right to me. I don't have these puzzles memorized, so there is that, although obviously I remember how you solve them. So let's see, when a player would get to this puzzle, they would probably just walk through this maze without really thinking about it to try to get to the panel. And when they get to the panel, they may not really think anything of it and just try some random thing in order to see whether that works, right? I think pretty much our easiest, simplest routes, like just going around the outside, are not going to work. So at that point, I think, I've never really seen a player have an issue with figuring out, I guess, the the panel, right? It's interesting to note that this fence here is at this odd angle of being cut off there. That's a little bit outside the scope of the coverage of this video, but it's interesting to note it at least. So, of course, there's a couple ways you could figure this out. One would be just to kind of walk through this and remember. I believe also there's this, which is a vantage point that would allow you to kind of see relatively easily that, okay, we go in here and we go up and over and around. So kind of get a visual perspective on that, right? So that is kind of, I think, what the point of this platform here is, though I haven't seen many players use that because it's a little bit out of the way here. And players are, I mean, it's simple enough to memorize that, like, okay, you go up and then around on the one that's next to the top and then over, right? So it's simple enough to where you can kind of mentally just keep track of it. Interestingly, this opens this door and also this door. I think most players don't quite notice that it opens this door as well. But they'll move on to the next puzzle and notice that there are no walls in the same way that there are in the first puzzle, at least, and just move along. And once again, they'll find a panel and probably be like, well, there weren't any walls, so maybe anything will work. Of course, pretty quickly they'll realize that, in fact, not anything will work. It is funny how, like, how, I guess, subtle the quote-unquote walls of the grass are here. It often takes a long time for a player to notice that that might be relevant. Even though it's, I guess, oftentimes the way that everything is in this game is that it has this property that once you see it, you can't unsee it, and it's like all you see about this puzzle. Unlike the other one, I don't know that there's a good vantage point for this. I think you're kind of just stuck having to remember, because you can't walk over there. So really your only vantage point is either from back here, which I don't think is a particularly good one for that one because you can't see the grass, or just kind of remember it, right? Of course, it's not a big problem because we just did that with the last one, but it's at least interesting to note that you're not expected to have to remember. You do have a vantage point where you could see the puzzle if you wanted to take a picture or if you wanted to draw it or whatever the case may be. So from the beginning, we do have a little bit of, it's not clear here immediately that you would have to go right, so you do have to explore that to realize, okay, that's a dead end. So you would go right, and then up, and then again, we've got a little bit of a spot where it's unclear. Do we go left, or do we go the other way? I believe we go right and around. So that is like this, I believe. Close to this. There we go. Of course, that also opens this. And now we have access to both the next puzzle and also a little bit of ancillary area that I guess you could consider to be what would you consider it? A reward, I guess. I can't remember whether I comment, how much I comment on some of the environmental details in these areas in these videos. I usually keep the analysis kind of focused on the puzzle design rather than other details of the environment, but there obviously are certain things that people tend to notice, even if they haven't really caught on to some of the more subtle aspects of the game. They usually notice that this looks like a guy. It's pretty obvious. But, you know, there's some smaller details like that. There's this guy here, who is, I believe, meant to be a Myst reference. Looks like the guy on the key art for Myst. Of course, you've got some shadow hints there. Anyway. Yeah, so this doesn't really serve any practical purpose. It's just a nice area to look around and give you a bit of sense of freedom and lack of claustrophobia that you might get otherwise. And I think that's good because the next puzzle can often be very frustrating for people, especially the average streamer that starts the game up realizes that it doesn't have music in it and then immediately throws on music. You know, they're often going to be frustrated with this puzzle, even though Even though, well, you know. So obviously a player would come in here and notice that there's no walls here, and not only that, but visually there doesn't appear to be any kind of detail in the puzzle at all that is noteworthy. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about how you have to design something like this if you don't want to have noteworthy details, right? It's like the amount of catastrophizing that the player could do is pretty high when you don't have any kind of visual information that's obvious, especially when they've just finished a puzzle where it was something that, although relatively substantial, would seem extremely subtle. So they might think, well, okay, the natural thing is the progression of this is that it's going to be something even more subtle. So it's interesting to note that, like, the puzzle itself is designed, you know, even in such a way that much of the subtle details of these bushes are just kind of this, really, if you think about it, a repeating pattern that looks the same everywhere, right? So there's nothing that the player can use as a clue at all, really, because everything looks the same. So obviously, you know, watching this video, if you're watching it, you probably know that the clue is the sound of the gravel, which of course would require a player to be listening to the sound, and also make the puzzle impossible if the player can't hear at all. Hence part of why this area has that back courtyard with separate puzzles, because otherwise the area would be impossible to complete without looking it up for people who can't hear these hints, right? One thing I was thinking about that would be interesting that you could do with this that might be less intrusive than, say, putting captions on the screen for all the footstep sounds in the game, if you wanted to make this more accessible, would be something like the PS5 controller that has like more detailed haptics. You could do haptics for accessibility for the footsteps. So that might actually work rather well for something like this. Of course, that is a relatively limited thing right now because you would only be able to have that feature on PlayStation 5 right now. But it's an interesting thing that I thought about in kind of my musing about this area before I started doing the video. So, so there's really two kind of sounds here, right? There's a footstep sound that sounds very quiet. Then there's a loud footstep sound that I think is really obvious. So there's kind of two ways you could interpret it, is that you need to walk where it's loud or you need to walk where it's quiet. Of course, logic would dictate that because the start of the puzzle here, this entrance here, is quiet, then you probably don't walk where it's loud. So we're not going to spend really time investigating that, but I have seen players take that approach, so. It is nice that the loud footstep sound is actually, I would say, significantly loud. So it's rather noticeable even if you have things set to a low volume, which I do right now. So, also what's interesting here is that this is aligned to the direction by which you entered the puzzle, right? So, rather than being aligned to the exit, right? So, you enter from the side and then turn right, and so it's aligned to the entrance. which is not necessarily more or less confusing, but it is interesting that it's aligned that way, right? Obviously, that will matter in a minute. I believe this is the correct solution. Okay. Once again, this opens this door, which kind of gives us a shortcut back out and makes this less claustrophobic, because otherwise we would have to go back all the way through these mazes just to get out of here in case we can't figure out the next one. I will say that this next puzzle, the solution that it has, I have seen some players in their catastrophizing imagine that being the solution here, that perhaps these two puzzles, or the two mazes, are different. This gets a little bit exacerbated by the fact that this panel over here is, it's not really rotated, but people perceive it as rotated. So sometimes they start trying to think of ways that would work. I don't think it would work due to the fact that if you rotate this, it doesn't really overlap, right? There's no equivalent rotationally way through it, so that that theory kind of gets shot down, you know, due to where this exit is and the entrance is. Like, there's no way that could be rotated exactly. So then with this puzzle, we've got once again a maze that you walk through, and we've got an end here, and no obvious details. Once again, the physical maze has to be rather uniform as you walk through it. Sometimes people start to wonder on that one and on this one whether it has something to do with the shadows, right? I guess I'm just saying that I think it's really interesting that you would have to bear a lot of these things in mind as you're designing the puzzle, right? That somebody might think, well, maybe it has to do with the shadows, right? So you have to design the puzzle in such a way that, or the maze in such a way that that's not going to be relevant, right? So one part of that would be like that you have to walk through a shadow to get into the puzzle, no matter which way you go, right? So if we're saying, well, we have to ignore the shadows, or we have to go avoid the shadows or something, that's not going to work. And then if you say, well, let's follow the shadows, that doesn't work either, right? Because you can't get to the exit because the exit's not connected. And I think you kind of have to do the same here, right? Where it's like, okay, well, what if we avoid the shadows? I guess you could kind of avoid the shadows here. Just barely. But in that sense, you could also, like, avoid the shadows everywhere, so... and in any case, these things don't line up, so I don't think that would work if you tried to apply that. I don't know if I want to expend the brain power to think about that, but let's say you go in here, you go over one, up and left one. I don't think that even exists on here. Yeah, you can't really do that, so... these two mazes are very much designed to be very different in terms of their structure, right? So the physical maze here has lots and lots of little dead ends in it, right? So pretty much all over the place there's bits with dead ends. Like, there's a dead end here, there's a dead end here, there's a dead end here, so I think that the player kind of can intuitively realize that this doesn't have any dead ends, so it must not be the same, right? Even just from like where they're standing here, it's not the same. There's little smart things like the fact that this starts in the corner, right? And ends in the middle. That gives you an indicator that it's not something like the thing being rotated or inverted in any type of way, because the start and the end points are the same on the panel versus the grid, We don't have any weird rotating stuff like you have in the corner one back there. So we don't have anything to kind of add confusion there. It's also very helpful that the player can see the panel while they're walking through the maze the whole way. I don't know that that's true for all of these. I guess it kind of is, right? But it's useful here in the sense that the player can kind of walk while thinking about, okay, how could I go through this maze in a way that works? So, like, that doesn't work because it doesn't line up, but this works because it does line up. And so you would go like this, I believe. Yeah. So that's our resolution for all 4 of the front courtyard panels. At that point, we can, of course, go up there and solve the panel and get the laser. But then the video would be over rather quickly without covering any of the backyard, right? So we need to do that, I believe, before we allow ourselves the luxury of climbing the tower. So, so those are some interesting little bits that you can walk around here. I think oftentimes players don't realize that they can go over here because it's sort of hidden, right? Sometimes even if they've solved the backyard, they don't realize that that's the case. So when we get over here, from the front side, we can, of course, kind of see some of this stuff over here, but we're not allowed to access the puzzle from this side because there's a gate on the back side of it. So it's designed to where, in order to access this puzzle, you have to solve the other puzzles. You can, of course, see this triangle panel. We have not been covering, thus far, the triangle panels in these analysis videos. I may do a video that just covers the triangle panels in their different locations. I don't know whether to do that. So, there definitely have to have been triangle panels in some of the places that I've been, but I think this is certainly the one that's the most obvious in terms of its placement, right? But we haven't been covering those, and we haven't been covering vaults. I think we actually did cover the first vault, though, but not any of the other ones. Anyway, we'll go back to that stuff later. So there's of course, a guard here as well as a gate. This panel here, which opens this door, is very obvious in terms of its bright green color. I think we had one of these that was bright green also in the desert, so it does make me wonder whether all of these types of panels are bright green. These, like, doorknob panels, I guess you might want to call them that, right? Because it literally just opens the door, and that's it, right? So here we've got our guard in kind of, I guess, 2 senses of the word. We've got, like, some kind of government agent with a wire in his ear, and also he's got a sword, so I suppose I should cover some of that a little bit, because I do at least know with this area what the theming for these statues is intended to represent. Because, you know, we're in this old medieval castle, of course, right? But then there's this modern technology of these panels and, of course, these puzzle platforms here that you walk on and stuff, which we haven't quite gotten to yet. So, like, the intersection of that old and new technology is sort of what's being implied with these statues, just in a different way, right? We've got medieval technology and then modern technology at the same time, and we've got kind of a combination of those two things. Not in every spot, but there's some of that, right? I won't go too deep into trying to analyze what those mean because every statue probably has its own meaning to it. But in any case, so obviously the player might come along to this and see this panel that doesn't appear to have a starting point. And then there's this over here. They might try to do that and it does nothing. And be somewhat confused by that. But then it's very likely that in walking over here, they're going to step on these and accidentally press down some of these puzzles. Even if they're just walking along like that, then they're bound to notice when they turn around that those are now depressed. So there's a high level of discoverability, I think, in terms of how this puzzle works. And it's very likely, it's kind of important that the player is going to see that panel first, because they'll kind of be like, well, this panel doesn't appear to have a start, so I don't know what to do with this. And then by accidentally stepping on these, they will piece that together in their mind, I believe. So definitely something that I have not covered in these videos is the potential meanings of those audio recorders. I'm trying to remember who it is who's doing another witness analysis series on YouTube, which I would highly recommend, but I can't remember what it is right now. Actually, let me go ahead and just pause this because I think it's worth mentioning. So the series is by Jackson Wagner, that's Wagner, and the series is called Examining the Witness, a Philosophical Long Play. He's also the creator of a Braid mod called Braid More Now Than Ever, which is interesting and worth checking out. His series has stagnated somewhat after about 8 episodes, but it's very interesting if you're interested more in discussing and analyzing the audio logs and the environmental kind of details in terms of how they might relate to the puzzle's design and stuff. We do appear to be getting a little bit of judder, so hopefully that'll clear up. Oh no, I'm seeing like vertical tearing. That's very strange. Okay, that seems alright. So hopefully that's cleared up, and hopefully we don't have any like weird lag in the video, because I seem to be having that problem on almost every recording that I do, although I've made some changes for that will hopefully clear up that audio lag going forward. Anyway, so of course the player will in all likelihood screw this up in some way and wonder whether there's a way to reset it, and then may learn that this is what resets it. I think the discoverability is all quite good here, is I guess what I'm saying, because I think that naturally the player is going to be like, well, okay, how do I reset this? And they may or may not have already interacted with that and begin to suspect that that's what that is. The actual puzzle here is relatively easy. This is sort of an inversion of the front courtyard in terms of how it works mechanically, right? Because the front courtyard, kind of if you think of that first puzzle, it's like, well, we've got a maze in the environment, and the clues as to how you solve the panel are in the environment. Whereas here you've got, you know, a maze panel that has clues on it, and the environment is lacking those clues, and you solve the puzzle in the environment, whereas on the other one you solve the puzzle on the panel, right? So here it's kind of just, I believe there's nothing particularly strange about this one. It's just follow the panel, right? Memorize what it is. There's nothing particularly strange here. It's just a matter of needing to remember. Now, I don't want to screw it up, so I'm going to go look at it again. Okay, yeah, so we have to kind of zag around here, it looks like. It's also possible the player might, you know, try to do something like just fill all the spaces because, well, that would work, obviously, right? But, well, I don't exactly remember what happens if you do that. I think it just doesn't work, right? I believe that's the case, is that it just doesn't work. Yeah, so it just not working is the indication that you've done something wrong there, right? Naturally, the player would expect that that would work, and not working is enough of an indication that you're not going to be able to do it simply, I suppose, right? Of course, we have a rather loud sound when you do that. And these things no longer are depressed. Power does in fact come from this panel, not from that, even though it does snake along over here. But I think that's interesting that it does go along this start position on the walking panel, because it kind of gives them both. They can both be used as focal points for where the power is coming from. Not that I think many players are going to think about that as they're going through here, but it's useful. I think the sound is rather noticeable when you finish this, so there's not really going to be any confusion about whether or not you've solved the puzzle. So here we got some guards and some people who are, I guess, happy to be coming in now to the party. I suppose this is the party. Although this guard also maybe is distracted by this fight that's broke out over here or something. This fencing match has got out of hand. I don't know. In any case. Don't want to pontificate too much on that. Now, I kind of have a question, which is, because you can go over here, but obviously there's this fence, right? So I'm wondering whether or not it's possible to skip that puzzle. And my hunch is that it is. Yeah, so it is actually possible to skip the second puzzle and go straight to the third puzzle. Which is interesting. If the player is exploring a bit, then they can skip that one. Now, of course, it's more likely that they're going to know the little black and white stones mechanic than that they're going to know the polyominoes from the swamp mechanic. So, obviously there is a route back here to the ship, but since there's no puzzles for the for this area, that's not really, I wouldn't consider it part of this area. I would consider that a separate thing. It's a vault. And it's also, mechanically, it's an audio puzzle, right? So, I mean, I guess it's a mixture, right? It's a mix-in between audio and symmetry, essentially. But yeah, so let's go back over here and do this puzzle. But it is interesting to note that you can skip it. It's not necessary to do this puzzle in order to gain access to the top of the tower, even if you were doing this backyard exclusively, right? Whereas I believe it is necessary to do this one, and I believe it is necessary to do the last one here, right? So there's 3 puzzles that you have to do, and this one can be, I suppose, avoided if you are particularly explorative. So, this puzzle's a bit of a joke in that naturally the player is going to look at this and be like, oh, well, this is easy. You just go up and over, right? That's way simpler than the other one. And then they'll be stymied when they realize that there's a difference between the environment panel and the physical maze and then the monitor maze. I don't know what to call these. Anyway, they're both panels, right? But the panel and then the physical panel, there's a difference there in terms of you can't actually use this because it's physically broken, right? And of course, there's a more subtle difference in that, I believe, in that you can't walk through here, right? Which I believe will come into play in a second. So, anyway, I don't think that is actually doable. So then you have to think, okay, well, how can I do this while avoiding that? So your natural inclination is probably going to be to do something like this, and then go around, and then over. And I believe this is where that starts to come into play, if I'm not mistaken. That you start to think, well, okay, I would want to go. Yeah, because you can't go straight. Well, no, you could go straight down, right? You could go straight down and then over, I believe. Straight down. And then over. Yeah, so it's not as important here that you are careful with your steps. It's more just that this is broken. Forces a different solution than you might otherwise have. Of course, there's more to these puzzles, as you may know, but again, that's outside of the scope of this video. We'll come back to that stuff in the future, because there's a lot to cover in this game. And we can't cover everything in every episode, so. Yeah, so this one, I do find it interesting that this puzzle itself is kind of simple enough that players can often intuit that that maybe they need to place these shapes down, even if they haven't done the swamp. Like this puzzle and the next one are kind of simple enough that a player might guess the mechanic. Now, it's also helpful that you're forced to make this move, right? So, and that's an interesting thing about this puzzle as well, is that you're forced to do that to begin with. I'm trying to think of what that specifies about the solution here exactly. I guess it specifies that this needs to be connected, right? Because otherwise you would be... Well, you could theoretically... Well, no. So because of that, I think the player kind of will naturally make this shape, right? I don't know if that's the only solution. In fact, I don't think it is. But I believe that the next solution is unlocked by the fact that you open this door and can now solve it from that side, right? So in this case, we just kind of go straightforwardly solving this. And yeah, so we have this difficulty here, right? Which is that this is our main solution wants to go through here, and now we can't walk here because there's this barrier. So that might seem like it makes that impossible for us to do, but in this case it's not really impossible. We just have to be very careful about where we step, because we can of course cross over here and then go back and hit that to do that solution. So it's not utterly impossible to do the thing that was obvious, but it is somewhat challenging in terms of navigating due to some areas being walkable and others not. Yeah, so it's kind of an extension of, I guess, what we saw back in this previous puzzle where there was this thing that we couldn't walk through. Only here, it wasn't exactly relevant, at least not in the solution that we chose, right? Which I would say is probably the most obvious solution. So, moving on. Now, like I said, you can solve this differently. Coming from this side, I believe. If I'm not mistaken. Because then you're not forced to use this tile, right? Because you're entering from this side, which means you can avoid that. That, however, again, is outside the scope of this video. Oh yeah. So there's also a nice little exit now that we've unlocked. Again, it's a green kind of, I just kind of call them doorknob panels. I don't know what else to call them. That will lead back into the Shadow Puzzles area. If the player has not done these puzzles and not found this area, then this may actually clue them into that there was an area here in the first place, because otherwise it's kind of secluded, right? And I feel like this being here is more obvious and intriguing than maybe the natural entrance through the forest to that area. You know, the fact that there's kind of vines here leads your eye down, because you kind of wonder, because otherwise you might just be like, oh, okay, but I think the vines kind of leads your eye down to that door, right? It's interesting that there's entranceways here that are closed off. You can see some of the statues through that way. Guess we didn't really look at those statues. They're a little bit difficult to see in some spots, but there's someone who's like taking a delivery of something, and then there's a person over here who's threshing. Is that what we call that? You're harvesting wheat or whatever with a sickle. Anyway. So here, what do we got? So here we have some rotatey things. I think players can also figure that out. I did not on my first playthrough figure this out before I went to the swamp. I think I just did the front courtyard, went up and solved the meta puzzle. I guess you would call it a meta puzzle there, and finished the area. So here, of course, we have a fairly open puzzle, and players will tend to think that, okay, well, if they're thinking about the shapes, you know, it's pretty clear that they can't just place this shape here, so rotating it seems to make sense, and rotating this seems to make sense, and so they may go in and just be like, okay, well, let's get started and start drawing. And usually players will go along, and about this point they'll notice that the other side is also moving, right? I don't remember if this is even a solution. It is not. There's way too much excess space in that, isn't there? Oh, it's interesting that this shows black if it's wrong. I didn't realize that. Didn't show black on that first one when it was wrong, strangely. I assume it doesn't always show black. No, yeah, it's just when it's wrong. So if it's got... I see. So if it's wrong that way, it doesn't show black. But if it's like a valid path, but it's incorrect, then it will show a black line to show that you're wrong. That's interesting. Okay. So of course we need to do a symmetrical solution here for this to work. We can't go up like this, though, because that would block the exit, so we have to go over. believe that this is our straightforward solution here. I think the fact that it's symmetrical makes it more likely that players are going to figure this out, because this shape is not even really rotated, so if they just solve for this shape, then they solve the puzzle. So it's easy to kind of accidentally figure that out. This one also has an alternate. I don't quite recall. I don't think that it really matters where you do it from, because you have full access to the bottom row here, right? Anyway, it's interesting to think about. Now we can get right up close to this puzzle and not do it. Yeah, I feel like I need to do a series on that, or just a video on that, going around to all the different places where those are. I don't remember off the top of my head where they all are, so I will have to think about that, or just get a a list or something of their locations and go through that. Although there is another way to know, which I don't know if I will spoil in this video. I may spoil it in the actual video about that as the way to find them. Anyway, so yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything down here. So now we can officially climb this tower. Let's not look up, because that might make people feel a little bit weird. So there's two panels here. Of course, if you didn't solve the back end, then only one of these panels would be visible or active, and you only have to do one. Oftentimes, players will do both before they even come up here. So I think there's players that don't necessarily know that you don't need to do both. It is interesting that a earlier version of this area had a totally different puzzle at the top of the tower for solving this area. It was visible in the first trailer for the game. I don't really know exactly how the panel would have worked, but it's totally different than this one, for sure. So this one pretty much just combines the paths that we took through all of these puzzles to get here. We'll see if I can remember the real thing. So I believe you cannot go through it backwards, if I'm mistaken, or if I'm not mistaken, I should say. I definitely do not remember exactly what they were. I think this was the one there, and I think this was the one here, and I think something like this was the one here. I don't think you can go through it in reverse. This might be wrong though, so it's hard for me to be sure. So this goes like this. I can even kind of see that. You can't see it from here though, I don't believe. Well, you can actually almost barely make out the grass. I believe that goes like that. It might even be a slight darkness there. You definitely can't tell that one from here. So that goes over and through there, I believe. So that's like that, right? Am I wrong? I think that's like that. And this is like, I swear this is like this. This one is like this. And this one is like this. Right? Anyway, I remember it well enough to do it without going back down there. Yeah, so obviously we only need to do one of these to get the laser for this area. This one is easier, certainly, than the back one. However, it, because it doesn't require that knowledge, but it also requires you to be able to solve the audio one here. I guess there is a slight oddity here in that in this panel, they are oriented based on your direction here, right? So you're actually solving this in like a vertically flipped orientation versus what the actual panel was. So if you try to solve the panels by, you know, just taking photos of them and just copying them down, then that's not exactly going to work, because this one is flipped all the way. I don't think this one is, though. Maybe it is. I don't remember exactly. Can't tell from here. Anyway, this here is very different in that you can't take these solutions here that you did and just combine them, which is pretty obvious, because if you try to do that, then, you know, that doesn't even meet up with that, so how would that even work? But, and, you know, you can't do the, the symmetry thing there. So it's more just taking the symbols of those different panels down there and combining them together into a meta puzzle, right? And making that work, right? So we're stuck with having to go this way, which makes this a little bit different. But I don't think it's particularly wild. This left side's always a bit tricky, because you need to have room for these shapes. Now, if I recall correctly, we sort of have this 4 wide thing as like a linchpin of this whole left side, right? Because this is going to have to go somewhere over here. You're going to have something that goes, you know, like this somewhere, right? There's just no way to do it other than that. So you have to be able to get to that left side to do that. Do I remember what exactly that entails? Not really. I don't remember. But we're going to try to solve it. Just going through here. So we can do this, but I believe that that kind of puts us right out, right? If I recall correctly, because then we're just in a situation where it's rather difficult to do that. But I'm going to try to do it anyway, in case I'm wrong. So we can certainly do that, and then we can certainly do this here, but I don't quite know how a 4 would fit in there. Because if we do that, no, we can do this and then do that. Okay, so there's a back solution with those stuck together, I guess, except for the top one. It's probably not the only solution. I'm sure there's one where it's done differently, but I don't think there's any way that we could put the 4 right here, because we have to separate these whites somewhere, right? Well, is that wrong? I almost wonder whether there's a way to do it that way. Still got a little time left before we would hit the hour on our video. Not that we're obliged to make the video an hour long, but yeah, there's just, I don't think there's any way to do that. I mean, you could do something a little wild. Maybe you could do like this. But yeah, the thing is like no matter what, well, no, because you could do this. Yes, I think you can do this, and then you can do this, and then you can do this. So yeah, that's an alternate solution. It's a little bit wilder, but it doesn't involve sticking these shapes together quite as much. Anyway, point being, there's multiple solutions there. You don't really get any benefit for doing it one way versus another. But that's that, and that gives us our next laser. So we've got that. I do need to re-get this and symmetry. I don't even think I have symmetry. I need to re-get those so that I have a cohesive file, right? Anyway, I believe the next one that when we voted on, I had a poll almost a year ago now, geez, of what areas we wanted to do next. The rank of those has been what I've been using to determine the order for the last few ones. So we had Forest came first, and then there, and then the Keep, and then the next one would be Quarry. That would be, I think, all the areas except for recovering the audio puzzles. I feel like I should recover the audio puzzles, and then of course the town, which pretty much no matter what I was going to do last, but so that wasn't why it wasn't on the list. Also, you're only allowed 4 things. It looks like we're still getting some tearing on the video, and vertical tearing, which is very strange. But in any case, thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully the tearing on the video hasn't been too bad and the audio hasn't gone out of sync and all that. If you're watching this and you are not a member of the Sexy Hikers Club over on OnlyFans/MVanDiemendur, then there's a link in the description. You can see these videos early, and I will be doing more analysis videos, both of The Witness and of other games. Unannounced at this point, although I will say that the degree of effort that I put into doing other games, and possibly games that maybe I wasn't exactly interested in covering, like Undertale, may get covered depending on how many people decide to sign up to be part of the Sexy Hikers Club. So you too can join this. There's no nudity over there. It's just analysis, just hot, uncensored analysis videos. And I also have video game feet pics as a joke because someone asked for that. So if you're really into that, then just don't tell me because I don't want to know. But they are being posted there, partly as a bit of a running gag on my part. But in any case, yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So I will see you all around.